Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar by Innovation in Payments and Remittances, IPR in short. So RemitONE owns the IPR brand, and we thank our partner BP Ventures for sponsoring this IPR session here today. In this session, we'll be discussing cryptocurrency as a payment method, the new growth potential for money service businesses in the industry. I'll be using the word MSB in short for money service businesses. So we will be focusing this session on how USDC is accepted as a payment mechanism. We will define all these terms for you as we move along. Don't worry. So I'm Aamer Abedi, the Chief Marketing Officer at RemitONE, and will be your host today for this session. We have one and a half hours here for today's webinar. For the first hour, I'll be moderating a discussion with our panel of experts. Then there will be a 30 minutes session at the end of the session for Q&A from the audience. So we want to hear what you have to say, what you have to ask, and our panel of experts will respond. So please do submit your questions via the Q&A button, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, at any point during the webinar, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the session. Before we dive into the discussion, just a few words about RemitONE, the organizers behind today's event. As a company, our mission at RemitONE is to empower the global money transfer industry with technology and business solutions to provide secure and fair transfers for those who need it most. That's why in 2018, RemitONE launched Innovation in Payments and Remittances, otherwise known as IPR, to bring together various industry supply chain members to help drive positive change. We're grateful that so many of you have joined the session today to continue this mission with us. To start today's session, I'm very pleased to introduce our panel of experts. Firstly, joining us, we have Mr. Jeffrey Phaneuf, one of the founders and directors of BP Ventures. Jeff was formerly president of Tempo Money Transfer, an EU payment institution authorized by the Banque de France, as well as president of Tempo Financial Holding Group of Companies, and senior executive at RIA Financial. Jeff has 20 years of payment industry experience, leading fintechs from creation to successful exit, such as the $500 million sale of RIA to Euronet. Next up is Mr. Anthony Barker, one of the founders and directors of BP Ventures. Anthony was formerly General Director and CTO at Tempo Money Transfer, as well as Head of IT Equities Trading Technology at National Bank and BMO, that's Bank of Montreal in Canada, with 20 years of successful banking, IT, crypto, and management experience. A serial entrepreneur, Anthony met Jed McCaleb in 2016, introducing Stellar to Tempo, subsequently creating and launching Tempo's EURT stablecoin on Stellar, piloting multiple Stellar partner interfaces with financial institutions all around the world. And finally, we have Mr. Arif Saleem, Chief Technology Officer at RemitONE. Arif has been involved with the technical side of the remittance industry for over 15 years and was a founding member of RemitONE. An alumnus of the world-famous Imperial College London, he has been an advocate of open source software since the late 90s. Outside of work, he is involved with his local community on educational and charitable projects. So without further ado, let's get into today's panel discussion. I'm going to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining, panelists. First question for Anthony. For the benefit of everybody, our audience, please let us define the terms: blockchain, cryptocurrency, stablecoin, and token. It would be great if you could highlight also the fundamental differences between cryptocurrency and blockchain in your response to. Anthony, thanks.
So blockchain is a word that you've heard probably in the news and everywhere. It comes from Bitcoin originally, and Bitcoin has a system, a technologically system, where they verify blocks of transactions, and the blocks come every 10 minutes. And computers all over the world, right now in Bitcoin, there's over 5,000 computers called validators. They validate the transactions. So I was talking to my sister at one point, and it was about 8 years ago, and she had heard about Bitcoin. She works at Royal Bank of Canada, and she said, this sounds great for sending money to Africa. Now, my sister was really ahead of the ball because she said, we have issues with our banks in Africa that we can't, our Nostra and Vostro accounts, we have currency and we have settlement issues. So because you have these external validators, you don't have to worry about the person you're sending to or yourself verifying the transaction occurred. A cryptocurrency is generally, like Bitcoin, it include all types of cryptocurrencies. These typically use blockchains. So the ones you might have heard of might be Ripple, Stellar, Bitcoin, Ethereum. You might have heard of Terra, which had a major issue recently. And the differences between a stablecoin and a token is stablecoin is typically tied to the value of a currency. So the one we're talking about today is called USDC. It's generally, like Bitcoin, it include all types. So USDC is a stablecoin issued by Circle Corporation, which is a U.S. regulated financial institution. It's audited by third-party auditors. And there are other coins such as USDT, which is quite popular in Africa, which is issued by a non-US entity. It's issued by a British Virgin Islands entity and is not audited in the United States. So these are stable coins. They're tied 1-to-1, and in theory, you should be able to cash out $1 of USDC, one USDC for $1 US. There may be other ones which would be tied to, say, for example, the euro, which is the one we created.
Okay, great. Why Stellar? What, in your opinion, distinguishes Stellar from other blockchains?
So in 2015 and 2016, when I was looking at how to use this blockchain technology or Bitcoin in remittances. I looked around at the ecosystem, and to me, Bitcoin really looked like gold. It was sort of a store of value. There was also Ripple and Stellar at that point. And there was Ethereum that had just launched. And Ethereum, I talked to Vitalik because I'm from Toronto. I knew him. And I said, are you guys focused on the remittance space? And they said, no, we're not. So I said, okay, well, that's an easy answer. We're focused on smart contracts. Now, meanwhile, Stellar and Ripple had been built up really to focus on the international cross-border payments. So I had a look at Ripple, and you know how you said Arif was interested in open source? At that point, Ripple was closed source. It was owned by one corporation, and it was really focused on promoting their XRP token, which was issued mostly to employees and founders and investors in Ripple. So sort of, which to me seemed a bit strange. Then I compared it to Stellar, which was created as a California not-for-profit. All of the software was open source from the beginning. And that seemed to me to be a better platform to build on, where you could add additional value on top of Stellar, sort of like what Google has done with Linux. If you look at the Android operating system, it's a layer on top of Linux that they built. So they added their own value and their own IP on top of an open protocol and open operating system. So that's what I thought. That's what attracted me to Stellar.
Great. The volatility in the cryptocurrency markets, as evidenced by, we all know this, the fluctuating Bitcoin value graphs, it can make a money service business, which obviously wants prices to be as stable as possible, extremely nervous. I mean, how does the cryptocurrency as a payment method solution that BP Ventures and RemitONE are proposing here address this concern of volatility?
So volatility is, where does it come from in the Bitcoin? I'm sure you see it in the news every day. But where is that volatility coming from? Well, Bitcoin and Ethereum are mostly used on these offshore contract for difference trading platforms, which are highly leveraged. So people are trading individual traders are trading it at a 10-to-1 ratio or 100-to-1. So you can have 100 Bitcoin's controlled with your one Bitcoin. So when the market collapses, it has a tendency of going up very quickly and down very quickly. Now, stable coins, because they're tied to US dollar or euros, are much better for remittance companies. First off, for example, in RemitONE, when we put the USDC into RemitONE, we didn't have to change our FX calculations. We could just use the US dollar. So if I was sending money to, for example, Philippines, I wouldn't have to worry about what's the Bitcoin price against PHP. I would just say, what's the dollar price against the peso? And we would have that in our platform, and we can then price it correctly. We also, because it's so volatile, if you're making, say, a gross profit margin of 1 or 2%, as profit margins are declining in the remittance business, with Bitcoin, as it's so volatile, if you sell it and it goes up or down before the remittance is finished, after you've received the payment and you've sold the Bitcoin, you can lose quite a bit of money. You can lose all of your profit. And third thing, when we talked to the regulator in France, they were very against the volatility aspect of Bitcoin, insofar as they were worried that we could be wiped out as an MSB if we had much Bitcoin on our balance sheet and the price went down too much. Now, before I finish, I just wanted to talk really quickly about Terra, the Terra stablecoin, which most of you probably have heard of, how it blew up. There was 60 billion, which evaporated in value, which evaporated overnight. And how does that impact stablecoins, and how does that impact our Circle USD recommendation? So Terra was a so-called algorithmic stablecoin, and we did not recommend that to our clients. First off, it's backed by crypto. So there's two things I'd like to say. The first one is I treat the Terra blow up a little bit like the internet.com blowups in about 2000. If you remember, there was a lot of companies that were flying high and they went to zero. Now, that a couple of specific companies blew up and went to zero does not mean that the underlying technology is bad. So, with internet, again, it took us another 10 to 15 years, and we had Google and Facebook and all these great companies that came out of that .com bust. So that's the first thing I would say, is that saying that one project was bad does not mean the whole ecosystem is bad. So we have to distinguish between the overall ecosystem and that one specific project. And the second thing is the blow up. If you look at cryptocurrency, the prices went down. People who had the Terra USD, they lost money. But did the system stop working? No. Whereas if you look at the bailouts that occurred in 2008, when major, like Barclays and other major institutions went bankrupt, they had to have government intervention to save the whole ecosystem. If you look at cryptocurrency, to give them some benefit of the doubt, it's still running. There's still transactions clearing. There's still settlement. And the USDC dollar is still worth $1. So,
and it's growing, of course. Yeah.
And it's growing. And their funds are based in U.S. treasuries. So they're not sitting their money in some risky offshore thing. All of their funds are in short-term U.S. treasuries. So USDC is safe, whereas other crypto, there's different levels of risk in other cryptocurrencies.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anthony. You mentioned the word ecosystem here. I'd like to bring in Arif and Jeff here. So in your opinion, gents, what is the next big thing in the ecosystem for remittances? Start with Jeff.
Thanks, Aamer. And thanks for the invitation for today as well. Great to be here. I mean, I think given the recent announcement of MoneyGram's cooperation with Stellar to offer USDC, the cash in, cash out, I mean, we believe that digital crypto blockchain powered payments is potentially the next big thing in the ecosystem. We've been involved in Stellar blockchain for a number of years and did implement it at tempo. I think the fact that MoneyGram has confirmed their entry into the space certainly kind of confirms that using USDC as a payment mechanism on Stellar blockchain has some merit. So I think personally that this is a very positive event, and that we will see increasing use of Stellar and blockchain payments, particularly USDC, in the future.
In the remittance industry, yeah, and payments.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Arif, same question to you from your perspective. How do you see the ecosystem evolving in remittances?
Yeah, so one of the big problems in remittances is obviously the friction at different levels when you're talking about international transfers. And any new technology that can reduce that friction and reduce the cost associated with that friction is definitely going to become more important as time goes along, especially if regulatory and other concerns can be addressed and allayed. So in that sense, it does appear as though one-to-one backed stable coins, which are effectively just tokens. They're just tokens against real funds which have been kept in a safe, audited sort of environment, which is how USDC is being operated. These kinds of funds, they do offer that. They do offer very friction-free international transfer. So at this point, if we're looking at the exchange of those funds just via the MTOs themselves, that's one step. But in the future, if these tokens become common usage amongst the general populace themselves, then that just opens up the ability to transfer value, the ability to transfer funds internationally even easier. So these are this is probably the way things are going, the way I see it.
Which is the different payment methods being available to the users, right?
Yeah, or even if they're able to make use of those tokens themselves directly, as a means of payment in a general sense.
Right. But Arif, in terms of payment methods, how have you seen payment methods change over the years?
So within the remittance space, obviously cash has always been there for as long as anyone knows, or as long as remittance has been around. But in the old days, there were also things like money orders, checks, these sort of very manual methods of making payments. Then as time went along, digital methods of payment became widespread. Initially, it was largely card payments online. And then more recently, direct bank transfers. So there was, for example, in Europe, we had SOFORT originally, and now more recently, open banking. So these methods of making digital payments have made significant inroads. They've made, they now contribute a significant factor or percentage of the payments that are made, especially in the sort of SEN countries, right? Like in Europe, North America, and Far East and stuff like that. So as we move further along, it's to be expected that there'll be new digital ways of making payments, and this is where these sort of stable coin-based crypto options become viable.
Yeah. And this is what we're hearing, these new buzzwords, obviously, in the industry: USDC, USDT, CBDC. I was going to say
CBDC.
CBDC.
Sorry, I was actually going to mention that. Sorry, you reminded me. So CBDC, central bank issued digital currencies. These are essentially digitized versions of the fiat currencies that we use ourselves. Yeah. And there's a lot of talk in the news. I think very recently the US Treasury was discussing issuing a CBDC maybe in the next few years. So once that sort of crypto or digital representation of fiat currency becomes widely used and easily available, then we really will see a big increase in the use of this type of digital currency in the remittance space.
Yeah. Which leads me to my next question for Anthony, actually. USDC. What is USDC, Anthony? And how does it compare to other US denominated stable coins like USDT and even CBDC that Arif mentioned?
So there are actually, if you go to something like CoinMarketCap, there are many dollar coins. The main two issuers in the United States, who are US regulated institutions, one's called Paxful, and the other one is called Circle. Circle is a publicly listed company, and they're getting a banking license. Paxful is a prime brokerage. It's a prime institute. USDC is a stable coin. It's created by Coinbase and Circle in 2018. It is priced equals $1. It hasn't really fluctuated from that in the past 4 years. It's managed by something called the Circle Consortium, which is a group of companies that oversee the financial standards for stablecoins and ensure there's transparency about the one-to-one backing. That means for one USDC created, there's $1 held in reserves, typically in a bank or in US treasuries, short-term treasuries. Right now, there's a supply about 35 billion US dollars. It's growing rapidly. It's been growing at about 5 to 10% per month, amount issued. It's issued by an approved regulated financial institution, which I mentioned. It trades on most major exchanges and cryptocurrency providers. So USDT is still the most popular stablecoin in terms of number of venues you can trade it, but it's unregulated, and it could be at some point, and there's always some disclare. It's not as transparent as USDC. So that's why we recommend USDC. We see it as a little bit separate from most cryptocurrencies because it's issued by a US regulated financial institution. Whereas if you look at Bitcoin, Ethereum, USDT, there's no US financial institution. So you could even say that, hey, you accept a Visa, MasterCard. It's from a US regulated financial institution. You're accepting USDC. It's also from a US regulated institution. So it's a little bit different than when you look at if you separate it out. It's different from other cryptocurrencies. Now, USDC is available on multiple blockchains, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing for remittance companies. So there's multiple blockchains around that are all competing. They're vying to get adoption by users. There's one called Algorand, Stellar, Tron, Solana. It's like a mixed mash of names. Now, the largest users are on Ethereum, and the second, and Stellar is smaller, but Stellar from the remittance perspective is kind of more interesting because MoneyGram's on there, and they've been always focused on not only on remittance companies or MSBs, but they've also been focused on integrating a standardized API so that when you do one integration, you don't have to integrate it multiple times. And they've also got a standardized way of passing KYC information, something like ISO 20022, but it goes right down to the protocol level and makes it more simple to integrate.
Great, thank you. So with USDC stablecoins, Jeff, why should our top industry, the money transfer industry, why should the MSBs, the money service businesses, use the USDC stablecoin as a payment mechanism, in your opinion?
Sure, Aamer. Well, I think we believe that there's several compelling reasons why USDC as a payment mechanism is interesting for MSBs. I mean, one is that it's fast, meaning that funds are received within 3 to 5 seconds versus a payment that you would receive, let's say, by a card processor. And depending on the processor, of course, but in my experience, we had some processors that were sending us the funds up to 15 after the transaction was performed on the long side. So we're talking here in 3 to 5 seconds, you would see the funds versus 3 days up to 15 days with some card processors. So that's one reason why we're advocating USDC as a payment mechanism. The second reason is we think it's better regarding decreasing both fraud and chargebacks. And why? It's because a USDC payment is irreversible. It's an irreversible payment. And so, again, my experience, and depending on the MSB, we had significant chargebacks. We had fraud related to customers that would after the transaction was performed, come back and say for a variety of different reasons that they were requesting a chargeback, which ultimately, and in some cases, meant that we were out of the money at the end of the day. So this, with a USDC payment as a payment mechanism, avoids this. So it's better, in our opinion, by reducing both chargebacks and fraud rates. A third reason is that accepting USDC as a payment mechanism is, we believe, cheaper, less expensive than a card-based or other types of payments that MSBs may accept. For example, in our case, we're proposing a 1% transaction fee, and then actually when we start the process, we're going to propose a zero fee to encourage MSBs and users to use it. But ultimately, we're looking at a 1% fee, and that compares to, on the average card processing fees, again, depending on the processor, between a 1.5 and to 3.5% processing fee, again, depending on your processor, without considering the chargeback and fraud fees that would also, potentially be encumbered by the MSB. So in resume, we think that a USDC as a payment mechanism is both faster, you receive the funds basically instantly. It's better because it reduces chargebacks and fraud, and it's cheaper versus other payment mechanisms, particularly versus cards at a 1.5 to 3.5% average fee. Those are probably the key ones. And then there's other areas as well, Aamer. I mean, it's the fact that this basically opens the door to MSBs being able to acquire new clients that may be, more digital friendly clients. And the fact that we're offering this, through RemitONE, there's no additional fee as far as a software setup fee. And again, as Anthony has indicated, and as we've postulated, using USDC as a payment mechanism, we believe is a very low risk way to kind of get your feet wet with a low risk, safe, stable coin in the industry. And we think it's the best way to kind of proceed. So in resume, there's a number of different attributes to use USDC as a payment mechanism that we think, or I think, is appealing for MSB.
That's very interesting. I think you partly answered my next question anyways, but let's delve a bit deeper for the sake of our audience. What are some of the fears the MTOs have, the MSBs have, about using USDC in your experience, and how do we address these fears? For example, go ahead. Please. Yeah.
Sure. I think there's probably two particular items that come to mind, and one is regulatory. Using cryptocurrency or stable coins, and is a regulatory concern, and that basically would be contingent on where the MSB, what jurisdiction is the MSB in, and do they require any specific or additional licensing. So that would be dependent on the jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions may not require it. Other jurisdictions may require additional licensing. So there's the regulatory aspect. Again, as we've outlined and underlined, we recommend Circle USDC because it's being issued by a licensed and regulated financial institution. So it's not the MSB, but there may be crypto licensing requirements. The second item I would say, of course, is in the banking sphere. MSBs normally are always susceptible to banking relations just in normal times. So certainly bank relations are precious, and MSBs may fear a impact if they offer USDC as a payment mechanism. I think our response would be, again, is that this is a payment mechanism similar to other payment mechanisms such as Visa or MasterCard, and it's issued by a regulated financial entity out of the United States. So in resume, I think it's probably two items, both regulatory and banking, that MSBs may be concerned with.
But
we all
Jeff,
know
as well,
Yeah.
sorry, just let me add on to Jeff's statement there. We also have one customer who can't do US dollar transactions. They're blocked from having US dollar account. And they're using USDC essentially as a US dollar bank account. So they're dealing in euros primarily. They can't get US dollar accounts, so they're using the USDC as a method of payment for US dollar payments. So you can, in theory, use USDC sort of as a bank account for an MSB.
Right. That's very interesting. What are some of the benefits? Actually, let me just go back to this question again. Sorry. With regards to the bank account. So yes, so we are addressing the bank account challenge, which MSBs, of course, can definitely relate to. Of course, we're all aware of that. The benefits of using USDC as a payment mechanism for individual users. I'm talking about the remitters here now. What are those benefits of using USDC as a payment mechanism? The MSBs realizing benefits, yes, that's been made clear. What about individual users here, Anthony?
So individual users. So the thing is, the individual user might not look like your traditional remittance customer. Mm-hmm. That's what we saw when we were doing it previously at Tempo. It's more of a digital native person. We saw like computer programmers or people but that was the initial phase. So if you look at the adoption rate, what I think we'll see initially kind of techie people using it, and then it'll go on to mainstream. And so MoneyGram, by offering it out through all its branches, you can go to a MoneyGram location and buy USDC currently for free. They've rolled that out in the US, and so you can buy USDC. You can bring your cash, go to MoneyGram, fund your wallet with USDC. Then you could send it to your auntie, and your auntie needs to do a remittance. Your auntie could then take that money and then pay for a transaction on her own side. We used to see this at Tempo where we would have people come in with cash, and they say, this cash is for somebody else. I'm doing this remittance on behalf of somebody else. We say, no, you have to do it on your own. You have to do KYC on you. You have to be the one sending the money. You can't send the money on behalf of somebody else. With blockchain, one of the benefits is I can acquire the USDC, send it to someone very easily, and they can then do the payment on their side. We've seen in Europe about 10% of Europeans have cryptocurrency of some kind. So you've got 10% of the population that who can use this immediately. In other countries such as Brazil, Vietnam is up to 50% of people have used cryptocurrency. Indonesia, it's about 30 to 40%. Nigeria, you're talking 40 to 60% of people have used cryptocurrency before. So there is this growing number of percentage of the population who have used cryptocurrencies of some kind, and they can probably, if they've used any cryptocurrency, they can get USDC. In Nigeria, for example, there's more people have USDC than Visa or MasterCard, or they have access to digital currencies.
That's an interesting statistic, yes.
So you're seeing, depending on the jurisdiction, cryptocurrencies are actually easier than traditional payment mechanisms, except for cash.
Right.
So again, from the MSB perspective, you're getting a new type of customer. From the customer's perspective, they've been, there's one group of people who've been using been using crypto, and they're immediately able to use your services.
Yeah,
that's great for them. MoonPay, which is a European regulated financial institution, they grew a valuation of basically offering this sort of conversion from USDC to a SEPA payment. They've got valuation I saw of $3 billion now. and they're growing at, I believe, 50% month over month for the past year. So the people can acquire the USDC in multiple ways. I pay my programmers in USDC. They may need to cash it out.
Yeah.
There's NFTs. If someone creates an NFT and sells the NFT, they're going to earn crypto, and they can convert that to USDC and cash it out. So there's multiple ways that people are acquiring the USDC, and there's multiple reasons that they're paying it out. So what we see is that both consumers and merchants are heterogeneous. What does that mean? That means there's no single payment mechanism that they want to use. Sometimes they might want to use you accept cash. Sometimes you'd use card. Sometimes you'd use SEPA or other payment or fast payments in the UK. So we think that there's basically multiple channels for customers to pay, and that's what they want.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Going back to Jeff, there was a comment that Jeff made about Circle. So Jeff, basically what you're saying is that if we look at our audience, and there are quite a number of MSBs on this attending this session. So from their perspective, as long as they meet the regulatory criteria, all they have to do is sign up with an entity like Circle, gain access to USDC, have this BP Ventures payment gateway enabled for their end users, and off we go. They're ready to trade.
That's right, Aamer. I mean, in fact, we can even go further for smaller MSBs, and we'll have a follow-up after this webinar. But to be able to assist those that have issues getting a USD Circle account, because BP Ventures can assist on that stage. But for larger MSBs, yes, we would certainly recommend that they would just open a USDC Circle account. And the fact that we're going to have this, and it is integrated directly into RemitONE, means that there's no setup fee. They're off and running, and it should be really a compelling, compelling new payment mechanism to be able to offer the MSB's customers.
Right. And Arif, from your perspective, because you've also seen obviously this evolution from a technology perspective of traditional methods, how they've evolved, traditional methods of payment. Sorry, what's different in your opinion from paying with a stable coin versus these traditional methods today?
So my answer is in the context of, say, the RemitONE platform, right? When a customer is using the RemitONE system to make a payment for a transaction. So essentially, the payment process remains the same, very much the same for the end user. So, for example, let's say you were currently using a payment gateway like WorldPay or something like that to make to obtain the funds from the user. So typically, the user would create the transaction on the platform. They would then get redirected to the payment gateway. They'd enter some details there, to collect their funds, their card or whatever. Or if they were using, say, open banking, they'd provide, their banking details, and that way the funds would be collected. And then the transaction would be marked as being payment cleared, in the sense it's available for further processing. So the same flow would happen when using the BP Ventures gateway for collecting their USDC. It's the same thing. It's just that instead of providing your card details, you would instead be providing the wallet numbers, your wallet number from which the funds were to be paid, and the wallet to whom the funds are going to go. So in that sense, the payment process is very similar. There's not really a great deal of difference. In terms of flexibility, so one of the things about USDC tokens is that you don't have to be in the US to use USDC tokens. You don't have to have a USD account to use USDC tokens. So you could be, in any country, as long as it's legal. I think there's some questions in the chat about it being illegal in Vietnam. So we're not talking about questions of legality here. We're talking about, as long as, it's legal and so it's fine to use it, then you could be based in any country and you could pay for your transactions using USDC. You don't need a US dollar account. You don't need to be in the United States to make use of it.
Interesting. Let's talk about costs, guys. Obviously, this is a question on pretty much on every MSB's mind. Jeff, I'll start with you. If you could tell us what is the high level cost at this stage, I suppose, to the MSBs. What is the actual high level cost to the MSBs if they wish to embark on this stablecoin journey with us?
There's basically no upfront setup cost, Aamer. And we've been, as you know, we've been working with RemitONE and our programmers, Anthony and RemitONE, diligently to basically offer the BP Pay one-click solution, which interfaces and makes the USDC as a payment mechanism a seamless way to accept it on the RemitONE system. So there's no upfront setup cost to offer this. And so that's the good news. There's no software development. We've already developed it. We've already tested it, and it's ready to go. Once the payment institution then starts to offer it to the customers, we've discussed offering up to 10,000 USDC in volume per MSB for free. With no fee, no processing fee.
Yeah.
And we've discussed doing this. One is to incentivize MSBs to try this new payment mechanism, to try USDC as a payment mechanism, to see if they have customers that are interested to use USDC as a payment mechanism. So we've tried to make it a very compelling offer. And what our plan is that after the 10,000 USDC in volume per MSB, then we would assess a 1% processing fee, which again we think is compelling and attractive if you compare it to a 1.8 to a 3.5% average card processing fee. And then if you consider as well the chargebacks, fraud, and payment delays of up to 2 weeks, basically it alleviates all those as we've already discussed. So we think at the end of the day, hopefully it's we want to make this a new mechanism that MSBs will use and customers will use, and it'll be an attractive, better, cheaper, faster mechanism than is currently available out there.
And just to clarify, that 1.8 to 3.5% figure that you mentioned, that actually will apply even on the first 10,000 USD, which is obviously with the option that you're proposing, it doesn't apply at all. There's no service, there's no percentage fee charged on the first 10,000, and on anything on top of that, you're charging a 1%, which is obviously in the grand scheme of things significant, which means significant savings for the MSBs here.
That's the aim. That's what we want to do, and that's our hope, is to make it a compelling offer, so MSBs can kind of get their feet wet in the digital space, but in a very low risk way, using USDC as a payment mechanism, and that's our hope, because we think at the end of the day it will both improve treasury efficiencies, reduce chargebacks, and ultimately increase revenues for payment institutions and fintechs.
Yeah. So across all industries, Jeff, the average chargeback, because you mentioned chargebacks, of course, and we know the challenge of chargebacks in this industry and the risk that these chargebacks pose. Some stats I've got here across all industries. The average chargeback to transaction ratio is 0.6%. This translates to 6 out of every 1,000 transactions which will incur a chargeback. Now, retail and travel industries have about a 0.5% chargeback rate. Merchants who sell physical goods tend to have a chargeback ratio at below 0.5%. So the chargeback fee can vary from $20 to $100 USD. Every dollar lost to chargeback fraud costs you an estimated $2.40. Which basically means that a $100 chargeback fee costs you $240. So how can USDC as a payment mechanism decrease chargeback rates and fraud, in your opinion?
Well, it's basically, Amar, that's the fact that it's irreversible, meaning that once the USDC payment mechanism, once the USDC is paid and received, which we said is in 3 to 5 seconds on Stellar blockchain, we've received the funds, or the MSB Circle account, they've received the funds. So there's not an option as in a card payment to claim a chargeback. I mean, it's an irreversible transaction. So ergo, we believe that, because of that fact, it will reduce chargebacks and fraud because of the fact that it's irreversible payment.
And Jeff, what does using USDC mean in terms of increasing revenues for our MSBs?
Well, again, we think it's going to increase revenues because of some of the attributes that we've already outlined in the webinar. Namely the fact that you're going to receive the funds in 3 to 5 seconds instead of in 2 weeks, meaning that your treasury efficiency is much better instead of having to pre-fund. You get the funds basically immediately instead of a long delay. Instead of having chargebacks and fraud due to card payments with USDC, you get the funds immediately. You reduce your chargeback and fraud rates, meaning that you're not at a loss in those areas. So your revenues basically should go up, due to the fact that the fee proposed is either for free or after 10,000 USDC is lower than cards. It means that your revenues again should go up because hopefully the transaction is going to be more profitable. So for those different reasons, those different attributes that we previously mentioned, we think all of those are compelling reasons to basically assist MSBs and to increase the revenues, due to those elements.
Amazing. And I guess this question is for everybody here, all the, our esteemed guests here. Are users going to use stable coins? And can we settle them?
So I'll start with this. So with our BP, we have a certain approach that basically we think that you should, as an MSB, should roll it out step by step. The first one we mentioned was to accept USDC. And that, proclaims that we have some users. And what we've seen with Moneygram, rolling it out not only to, I think, all of the US states for free for the next year, we should have some people who can acquire the USDC actually at no charge. So once the user has the USDC, they can then send it anywhere in the world basically for free. And the person on the receiving side can then use that at your MSB for cashing out. So that's the first step. That's why we're pushing this. Accepting USDC is the first step for MSBs. The second one is to actually, as an MSB, sell the USDC. So a customer can come online and actually buy the USDC, and you can mark it up, between, I've seen markups of up to 3%. But typically you do 0.3 to 3%, and that costs you nothing, and you're basically reselling the USDC you have already in your hot wallet. Now, the third step that MSBs may do in the future is actually settle with correspondents using USDC. We think that that's going to kind of happen in the future. We tried it previously with Tempo in the Philippines. We had it working to Philippines, Nigeria, Brazil. That worked. It's just not quite there at the critical mass yet. So that's why we're really recommending it as a risk-based approach. First, do the step one, accept USDC, get your treasury processes in place, update your compliance manuals around your new procedures. Step two is sell the USDC, and step three is to use it for for correspondent settlement. So we have a sort of three-step approach. You'll see immediate once you get to the third phase, which is Jeff and I call Nirvana, which is on-chain settlement with correspondence. For the MSB, I think we'll see there's other benefits that we didn't talk about. One of the things we saw, I've seen in history, is every bank in developing countries had a different way, a different reconciliation statement. Sometimes they'd send us a PDF. We were supposed to reconcile our transactions against a PDF. Some of them don't have APIs. Sometimes you have to download a CSV. they have different ways of charging their fees. Sometimes they charge it as a deduction. Sometimes they block it separately. And so the reconciliation from an internal perspective should be reduced for the MSB as well. So there's multiple benefits for the MSB once we get to so-called nirvana, which is on-chain settlement. But we're really pushing this first, accept USDC, take advantage of the MSB of MoneyGram's one-time opportunity. MoneyGram has told me directly that they'll be rolling it out in 10 countries.
Yeah.
So they've started with the US, every state in the US, every cash location, every agent, as well as their online presence for free. Within the next few months, they'll be rolling it out to 10 other countries.
Yeah.
Where they're licensed.
Yeah, I think Kenya, UAE are some of those, some of the countries in that list. Yeah.
So, as an MSB, I would be watching MoneyGram very clear. If I was a smaller, medium-sized MSB, I'd be looking very closely what they're doing and see if, watch the big whale and tack where they turn and try and take advantage of this one-time opportunity. That's why we're pushing it so hard. That's why we're offering this, no setup fee, 10,000 free with RemitONE.
Yeah.
Just to add what Anthony said, Aamer, and to expand, particularly on the setup side. We're trying to make this due to our, work over the number of years with RemitONE and our recent integration to offer USDC as a payment mechanism. We're trying to make this as easy as possible for RemitONE MSB user to accept this new payment method. And then we'll provide some links at the end of the webinar with some additional information and some assistance as required. But we're not sure. We don't know obviously today how many users for RemitONE are going to use USDC as a payment mechanism, but we think there's a lot of compelling reasons to try it, and we're going to try to make it from a technical side as easy as possible, seamless as possible to incentivize people to use it and to make the the financial reason to use it as well a compelling reason. So we're optimistic that it is a very viable way to make a payment, and again, based on the fact that MoneyGram is doing it, we think kind of validates it. But we'll see, and we'll work hard to hopefully maximize volumes.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I agree. Arif, your thoughts?
Nothing in addition to what's already been said.
Okay. Great. Arif, in terms of the next steps, from your perspective, how can we implement USDC as a payment mechanism, leveraging the RemitONE platform? Since we have a number of RemitONE clients on this webinar today.
Yeah, so similar to what I mentioned earlier about the process by which on the RemitONE platform, we can set up different payment gateways through which a remitter can pay for a transaction that they've just created either via the online portal or via the mobile app. So once the transaction has been created in the usual way on the RemitONE system and they then need to pay for it, we would then enable a payment gateway, which would be the BP Ventures payment gateway. The customer would then be redirected to the BP Ventures platform, where they would then enter the wallet numbers that they would need to provide for the USD payment. Once that payment goes through via the BP Ventures portal, their system, the BP Ventures system, will then make a call back to the RemitONE system to then mark that transaction as funds having been cleared. And because the settlement is literally within a few seconds, that will normally happen very soon, happen literally within 5 to 10 seconds perhaps. So once those funds have been cleared on the RemitONE system, the transaction would come out of what we call pending clearance status. It comes out of that status and it moves on, and it's available for processing and for delivery with the funds having been cleared and received. So not just cleared in the sense like with a card payment gateway, they're cleared, but the funds actually aren't received. They'll be received after maybe a couple of days, right? Whereas here the funds as USDC tokens would have been received by the MTO in their wallet. And so that gives that that level of completion to the transaction from the remitter's perspective. And from that point onwards, everything is just as normal on the RemitONE system. So there's very little change from the end user's perspective. The main thing here is, as Anthony alluded to, is the MTO itself must have its process in place for maintaining that wallet of USDC. And obviously, if they want to convert that back into fiat, then they'd have to have a process, for using one of the exchanges to do that. Okay. So yeah, that's the way I see it from a sort of practical perspective when using the RemitONE system as a platform for remittance.
Arif, I've got a quick question for you. Do you think the MSB could use it also for currency exchange, bureau de change? I know you have an FX module inside of RemitONE.
So if they want to pay for that,
if someone was at a store and they wanted to say buy, say they were in Dubai and they wanted to convert their USDC to the local currency, could they do that? Right.
So as it stands, the way the bureau de change module works is it doesn't have a mechanism for the customer to make an online payment. It's assuming a sort of physical payment, because typically it's cash or it might be a check or something like that. But if we wanted to allow the customer to make an online payment, and that, when I say online, it could be a card, it could be a USDC token, whatever it might be, we'd have to add that functionality, and then yes, you'll be able to create a transaction which was in awaiting the payment, which we already have. But then it's just to make the facility for the customer to make the payment. We'd have to add that in. And then once that's cleared on the back office, then the transaction could be fulfilled as a normal bureau de change transaction.
And on the receiving end, Arif, so someone's in Dubai and they have a USDC account, they have a USDC wallet with funds in it, they want to convert that into euros, into AED, then how would that work?
Oh, to convert it?
Okay. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, so then that involves the exchange. I'm not going to talk about that. I'd leave that to Anthony. Yeah. But if they wanted to receive it as USDC into a wallet, then again we just need to provide that integration at that point to the BP payment gateway, and then they'd be able to specify the wallet into which they want to receive it. We'd have to do something like that there.
Yeah. So I can answer that, Arif. We've done the integration already. Basically, they'd have to set up a processing bank. They'd have to have a processing bank set up. I'm talking RemitONE. Sorry for those listeners who are not RemitONE users, but they'd have to have a processing bank, and it'll pull and send it to the. They put the recipient address in the account number field, and they could do it just like a normal payment.
I see. Right. So if the beneficiary wanted to receive funds as USDC into their own wallet, all the remitter needs to do is provide the wallet ID of that beneficiary as the account number, and just create a normal account transfer to that specific.
Right. And one of the nice things in Stellar is they have this thing where you don't need to have this long. Maybe you've seen a Bitcoin address, but it starts with a 1 or a 3 and it's very long and it's hard to type. And then some people use scanners. You can also, in Stellar, there's this concept of kind of like an email address, but it's a Stellar address. So you can put John, but instead of the ampersand, they use a star. So that you can use, there's these sort of rememberable or typable names that people can use. It makes it a little bit easier for the remittance company to enter the account number.
Right.
But that's just little details that when you're dealing with something like Stellar, which was built from the ground up for remittances versus, again, digital gold or other use cases. That's one of the reasons we picked Stellar. Yeah.
Just want to reiterate what Anthony said to our audience members who are not on the RemitONE platform. The process would be very similar. So if you have your own software application or you're using another third-party application, BP Venture solution can work for you as well. So it's not to say that this is the only way through the RemitONE platform. So with that, Anthony, you mentioned, I know we're pressed for time. We have literally a minute or two left. So the final question, I think I'm mindful we didn't elaborate on the policies and procedures. So from the MSB's perspective, Anthony. What procedures and policies need to be in place to enable USDC?
So the first one would be you want to keep your in good standing with your regulator if you are a regulated entity. So in your compliance mail, you probably need to add a new section around policies and procedures for handling USDC. The second thing is on your treasury side, your treasury procedures need to change slightly as well. Who is managing the wallet from your team? Do you have typically we'd have a 2-person sign off for larger amounts and smaller amounts. Smaller amounts could be handled by a junior treasury person and larger amounts by 2. So these are some of the things you need to consider when you're looking at the compliance side. Compliance, we've got a pre-made BP. We have a sort of a set thing that we can provide clients. There's also treasury procedures, and it depends on how large an MSB you are. You'd have to look at, do you have multiple treasury people, or is it just one person handling it? And then if it's just one person handling it, how do you do, what's the checks and balances to make sure the person doesn't send the funds and then disappear?
Right. Okay. Thank you, Anthony. So we have quite a few questions here. I'm just going through the question. I'm trying to organize them in a way that helps, because they're literally, 60, 70 questions, I think, coming in.
So there's a lot of questions in the general chat, and then there's a couple of questions in the actual Q&A section as well.
So can you speak to the cost of on-ramping to USDC and off-ramping from USDC for MTOs? This would appear to be a major hurdle, albeit with expectations that the costs come down over time. Comments?
I guess the question, Aamer, is the cost to accept USDC as a payment mechanism?
That's the way I would read it, yeah. To the cost of on-ramping to USDC and off-ramping from USDC for MTOs. Can you speak about the cost? Yeah.
The way we understand, again, it depends on if it's with RemitONE, and if it is with RemitONE, it's integrated, so there's no setup fee. There should not be a cost per se. If the MSB then wants to get a Circle USDC account, that is just basically the time involved in doing so. So, if it's a RemitONE user, we've purposely tried to make this as easy and as low cost as possible.
Jeff, I think the question's not about setting up. It's when they say ramp on, ramp off, I think they mean exchange. So the MTO is sitting with the USDC in their wallet, but they want to convert that into, say, euros or into USD. So the costs associated with those conversions.
I understand. I think it depends again on if they're just moving USDC to USD. It depends on how are they off ramping. Are they using it through Circle and then doing a wire to their bank account? It should be. I would need to look at Circle, but it should be a wire fee it's typically charged if they're saying that they're going to convert USDC to USD, and then they want to wire it to their main treasury account.
Is the conversion rate 1 when they do that?
Yes, it should be. If it's USDC to USD, it's a 1-to-1 conversion rate, and they would need to check with Circle as to what a fee is assessed. I don't have it right in front of me, but to my recollection, it's just a wire fee.
Yeah, it's just the wire fee, Jeff. Typically, when you wire it out, there's multiple places you can convert the USDC to fiat. Right now, there's you could use a crypto exchange. We don't recommend using crypto exchanges because some of the banks don't like to see payments coming from crypto exchanges. And typically, we're recommending that the MSB uses Circle directly, or again, they can use our service. So that when you receive the wire, it's not coming from Kraken or from Coinbase, and then the bank might come back to you later if you receive a payment from Kraken and say, okay, you know, what is this about? You know, and then the other question is, where is the transaction occurring, which we haven't really talked about. There's I know some companies are going around some of the regulations by using an offshore entity. So for example, I'll do the clearing and settlement for online transactions in Singapore, where it's very crypto friendly jurisdiction, versus a non-crypto friendly jurisdiction or less crypto friendly jurisdiction like Pakistan or Bangladesh.
Okay.
So the only transaction coming into Bangladesh or Pakistan is a fiat transaction. So the actual transaction is occurring, for example, in Singapore. From Singapore, the funds are then wired into Pakistan.
Right. There's some questions on KYC. Anthony, how does the KYC process fit into the on-off ramp? Do you, as a provider, have to somehow tag this on, or is it part of the Stellar network functionality?
So if you're, again, it depends on what system you're using. If you're using RemitONE, which I'm familiar with, RemitONE has integration into different providers, or you can use the built-in uploading of your passport, ID, other documents. So if you're using the RemitONE system, you can just go ahead with RemitONE. All the existing controls, for example, you could, for example, create a new compliance rule that requires an additional ID or additional documentation for a USDC payment. So you'd say, okay, I'd go in and I'd create a rule if payment is coming as US dollars and it's coming from England, ask for proof of residence, for example. The second thing is if you have your own system. So built into Stellar, there is this thing called SEP24, which is it's kind of a standardized way of interacting with wallets for collecting KYC information. So there's about 12 different wallets that in theory you could connect into. We're not really covering this as the phase 3 integration that I mentioned earlier. But what we really recommend is that you get your policies and procedures in place for just accepting it. And then down the line, you can look at this integrating the Stellar with a wallet. So you can have a third-party wallet come in. And that wallet can actually integrate in this thing called Web3. I'm not going to go on this, I'm jumping around a bit, but I'm just, for more advanced people here, you can actually have, the person can authenticate using their Stellar key. You can pop up a KYC form, and it can be another wallet that's accessing your RemitONE system or your other backend system. So this is the way MoneyGram is doing, has looked at doing it, where they collect some of the information using a third-party wallet. They're using one called Lobster. I hope that answered the question. I see one other one. Companies like Binance are issuing crypto cards, which cryptocurrencies can be used for payments at the back end. Binance has the fiat to currency conversion. How do you see this model working? So this, for me, is very similar to kind of Revolut or TransferWise model, where they're starting in the payment space and they're breaching on to offer cards. The easiest one to integrate is a virtual Visa card that you can get from various vendors. The only cap thing that we've seen is that card issuance is done by region. So it's very hard to get global Visa issuance. So you'd have to sign with one issuer in Europe, another one in the US, another one for Asia, and maybe another one for Australia. Because after Wirecard blew up, there's no global issuer. And it's a very competitive business, this issuing of cards. The margins are not super high, but it is a model that I think can work. I've seen an Israeli company that's doing it, particularly for farm workers who work in the fields in Israel. The remittances could be paid into an account, and then you could issue cards to the users. So they pay for things in Israel.
There's a question here about Euro C. So will Circle's Euro C have the same fees as USDC?
So Circle C USD their Euro token just got issued, got announced. I think it was 2 weeks ago. My understanding, it's still sort of initial offering that is it's only on Ethereum currently. I think the fees will be the same. And they're also working, just so people know, on a Japanese one. They've signed up with a GMO. We've worked on the integration already for GMO for Japan. So you'll be able to convert your JPYC into a Japanese payment.
Right.
And that's actually, we've got that in beta working right now as well.
Anthony, you mentioned Vietnam in the beginning, at the start of the session. There is a comment here from someone who says it is illegal to use cryptocurrency for payments in Vietnam. So would this be similar to your comment about how the payments come into Bangladesh and Pakistan as fiat currency?
Yeah, I've seen, again, what people do is they do it in, they have a regulated MSB, for example, in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
They do the transaction in the United States, and then the payment goes out from there. The other thing I've seen is, you could legally challenge. I wonder if you could challenge the definition of what is cryptocurrency. Again, as BP Ventures, our argument is that USDC is an instrument issued by a U.S. financial institution, not unlike Visa and MasterCard, which is also an instrument issued by a U.S. financial institution. So in theory, I don't know what the regulation is in Vietnam. You'd have to look at specifics. But again, using USDC is because it's a regulated U.S. instrument, it could be argued, depending on how the regulation is, that it could be considered separate from Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all these completely decentralized blockchains.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. How can you verify the source of USDC funds if the funds are tainted?
Okay, this one we've got a solution for you. We've got a good solution. Actually, it's even better than cash or bank in certain cases. So we've got a partnership with a tool called Elliptic, and what they can do is they do a scan of all the dark markets and the various sources of where there's bad transactions occurring. Within a few months, we'll have a full integration with it, so you'll have a mark. Unfortunately, there's a fee for checking, but they can check back 6 to 8 steps back if that funds were used in any illegal usage, and that could even go down to gambling. Was it used in a gambling website? Was it used in the dark market for drugs? So they can check, and you can actually have it marked as cleared Elliptic compliance. And if you buy the full package for larger MSBs, you might even want to drill in, because there's various techniques that people can do to try and hide the source of funds. Mm-hmm. They've got tools to dig in, up to 6 to 12 steps before. What was it used for? Was the person doing some sort of smurfing or trying to obfuscate where the funds are coming from? We're pretty excited about that. Unfortunately, it is a little bit as an expensive add-on. So depending on your compliance requirements, you'd have to look at that. But it's fully integrated into the backend system.
Okay. Are there any restrictions on onboarding a Canadian MSB? Anthony, you're from Canada.
So not that I know of. I'm somewhat familiar with the Canadian regulation. It's one of the few countries that's integrated their MSB license with virtual currency. So their MSB licensing FinTrack treats it the same. Ontario is, unfortunately, it's sort of like the New York State in the United States, where they've decided there's one province inside of Canada has its own regulation. So you'd have to look at where you're offering the service in Canada, but I don't see any issue.
Right. Okay. I think Canada is one of those countries alongside UAE and Kenya for the whole MoneyGram USDC launch.
Yeah, I mean the Senate, which is one of the regulatory government layers, about 5 years ago did a full research on cryptocurrency, blockchain, and they were fully in favor of adoption. So there's various levels in government in Canada that are very pro crypto. Our securities regulator in Ontario is against because they deem everything as security. It's pretty clear that you could consider USDC not a security. We've gotten legal counsel to say that is not a security. So yeah,
okay,
that's pretty much it.
Thank you. There is a question here, Anthony, Jeff, Arif. How would we be able to validate the source of funds for customers using a stable coin?
Well, I mean, I think the initial approach, USDC is a payment mechanism, and that's what we're proposing here. Is step one, is that the customer would be going through all the KYC requirements as any other customer, whether they're making the payment in cash, whether they're making the payment by a bank wire, or whether they're making the payment by card. In this case, they're making it by USDC. So if they would be going through the same filters using RemitONE as current customers, unless the MSB wanted to add additional filters. So that would be the first aspect. And then again, the second aspect is that if an MSB would want additional filters for digital assets, as Anthony alluded, there are tools out there such as Elliptic where you can go back in time, just as if somebody came to your counter with 100 euros. You don't necessarily know where they got that from, but in the case that if you wanted to do that, there are tools like Elliptic that can go back in history on the blockchain to validate that the funds are okay.
Right.
And then what I've seen some people do is they'll ask for just the same as a large remittance thing. They'll ask for a salary bulletin, bank account statement, something like that, just to prove the person has sufficient salary to justify the amount that they're sending.
Okay. There's a comment here, Jeff. Wouldn't the cost of wallet and conversion to fiat, in addition to the processing fee of 1%, make USDC in its current state more expensive?
It may be more expensive if the customer, for the end customer, who that's the argument. I mean, and that's why we're trying to make it initially very appealing on the cost side. If the customer is a first-time customer, they do not have a wallet, they have to go buy USDC, then it may be more expensive. It may be more expensive. I mean, our argument is that, there may be those initial users that have USDC, and they may already have a wallet, and in this case, it would be less expensive. So it really kind of depends on the user and depends on where the user is, to kind of determine it.
And then let me add, if Small World wants to come and set up, we definitely will offer volume discounts off the 1%. Nick, okay?
Yes. Well, you heard it, Nick. So I think, so yes, there are lots of questions about a recording being available. Yes, there will be a recording, as I believe Arif responded as well. So I think we'll start wrapping up at this point. It was a good session. Thank you very much. Do we have any comments from our panel of experts here? Final comments?
I mean, I'll make one comment that this is so a lot of technology goes through so-called S curve. We saw that with the internet, cell phones, smartphones, all these sort of things, where you see a small adoption curve and then you hit this sort of growth period, and then it sort of flattens out. We saw that again with Android or smartphones in the past 8 or 10 years. I think we, in the stablecoin space, we're just starting to hit. We've come off the low end and we're starting to hit the ramp up period. So I think it's a great opportunity for MSBs or people in the money transfer space, fintechs, all sorts of companies to get involved in this. The people who get involved earlier will learn how this is working, and you'll have an advantage over everybody else who has not adopted this. BP, we come from the money transfer space, so we know what the problems are. We know how difficult it is just to keep going on a day-to-day basis with explosions all over the place. But we really recommend that you take a little bit of your time and invest in this. Invest some time and space to test this out. It may not make huge revenue right at the beginning, but you'll be ready for when mass adoption occurs. And you'll be able to beat the other companies like Western Union or somebody else who has not adopted this.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. Anything else, guys? Jeff, Arif?
I mean, on the pricing side, to Nick's point and others, we'll be sensitive to that. If we see that at the end of the day that we need to adjust, we'll do so. We want to make this a compelling new payment method that's available for people in the space. We think that there's a lot of attributes to using USDC. It's really just the first step, the lowest risk step we think for a payment institution to kind of get into the space. A second step may then be offering cash in and cash out of USDC, and then actually doing the on-chain settlement as a third step. So we're sensitive to that point, and we'll monitor it carefully because we're very eager and keen to encourage MSBs using the RemitONE system to try to use USDC as a payment mechanism. And we think at the end of the day, they'll find some compelling reasons to do so.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. Anthony? Sorry, Arif? Anything from you?
I'm fine. Yeah, I think the real experts have spoken.
All right. Thank you very much to everyone for attending this webinar with our friends Jeffrey and Anthony at BP Ventures, as well as RemitONE's CTO, Arif Saleem. We hope everyone found the session useful. If you want to review what's been discussed today, we'll be providing a written summary and video upload of all of today's sessions at remitone.com. And in our next RemitONE newsletter, which we share every month and a half, called the RemitONE Insights, we'll be sharing the details of this, a summary version of this session as well. So keep an eye out for that, please. We will also be sending you an email tomorrow with additional information on next steps and how you can access this webinar. And finally, we're thrilled to announce that we'll be hosting our first ever hybrid IPR global event in October this year. The event will be taking place in a fantastic location in central London and will also be available to stream online on our dedicated events platform. This two-day event, the IPR global event, will include a series of panels, networking sessions, courses, and evening events as well, boat cruise, etc. So please do head over to our website to read more about the event and reserve your tickets. It's definitely an event to get in the diary. Lastly, thanks again, everyone, and please do get in touch if there's anything you'd like to discuss regarding the session or how RemitONE or any of our partners can help you with your money transfer business. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Aamer. Thanks for the chance to be with you today. Thanks, everybody, for participating.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks
very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.